Just a heads up, when I initially recorded the audio for this video, I had some difficulties with background noise, and I tried my best to mute the background noise, but when I did that, it also caused problems with my own audio, and so I know that the audio in my videos is not the most consistent, but I'm just giving you a heads up right now. Let me know if anything I say is inaudible or you can't understand it, and I'll do my best to maybe provide some closed captions or something. But yeah, just letting you know that that might be an issue. So with that out of the way, enjoy the video. Hey guys, I'm back to talking about films based on video games. So when the pandemic started, I made my triumphant return to this series and then only got 2 movies in. As it happens, I did play a bit of the game and see the film shortly after Wing Commander, and I had planned to do the video, but around that same time we had a health scare with someone in my family who we thought might have COVID, which basically killed any motivation I had for YouTube. Even after that was resolved, stuff kept getting in the way, and eventually I just kind of gave up on this video. But I really like this series, and after finding the entire game available for free online and rewatching the movie, I am finally ready to talk about Lara Croft Tomb Raider. Keep in mind that half of this script was written about a year ago, so hopefully I can make the whole video sound somewhat coherent. Okay, so last episode was about Wing Commander, a film that I enjoyed, but unfortunately it came and went without much fanfare. Video game movies were truly beginning to have a negative connotation to them, but if there was one game series that could change that, it was Tomb Raider. The Tomb Raider series were massively popular. They revolutionized 3D games, they created a fun world where seemingly anything could happen, and the whole thing hinged on one of the most iconic video game protagonists of all time, Lara Croft. Why was this character so beloved? I think it was for 2 reasons. 1, 2.
Those are good reasons.
Okay, so all joking aside, the popularity of these games was no laughing matter. So, when Paramount got the film rights, they were hoping that surely this would be the film that could break the video game movie curse. The film, titled Lara Croft Tomb Raider, was released in June of 2001 and starred Angelina Jolie, Ian Glenn, Daniel Craig, Noah Taylor, and Jon Voight. And it was a huge success, making $131 million. Not only was it the 14th highest grossing film of its year, it also set the record for the highest grossing video game adaptation, a record it would keep for another 18 years. Also, fun fact, at the time, it set the record for the largest opening weekend for a film with a female protagonist. That is insane. However, from a critical perspective, there were a lot of complaints. Which begs the question, were the critics right? Or is the film's massive box office a sign that there's actually some quality to be found here? Well, that's what we're here to take a look at today. How did arguably the most iconic female character in video games make the transition from pixels to pictures? Obligatory disclaimer, I can't play everything. Most of my comparisons in this video will be based off of the first Tomb Raider game from 1996, though I will be taking my limited knowledge of the other games into account. With that out of the way, round 1, characters. Or maybe for this episode I should change the round to character because, let's be honest, this particular franchise lives or dies by its protagonist. In a time when most video game protagonists were just a blank slate character for the player to project themselves onto, Lara Croft had a personality. She was bold and fearless, but she was also cocky and kind of full of herself, and gamers loved her all the more for it. Female gamers felt empowered by a strong, independent woman who doesn't take no for an answer, while male gamers just saw the boobs and pretty much ignored everything else. Everybody wins. And because this character was so beloved, when this movie was announced, every actress in Hollywood immediately became interested in the role. We're talking Jennifer Lopez, Catherine Zeta Jones, Sandra Bullock, just to name a few. But director Simon West knew pretty much from the beginning that he wanted to cast Angelina Jolie. She had just come off of her Oscar win for Girl Interrupted, and most of her other work had consisted of indie dramas. She was certainly respected by critics, but she wasn't exactly a household name at that time. It was her performance in this movie that catapulted her into stardom. Now, even though Lara's backstory is significantly changed, as we'll talk about later, the character herself seems almost identical to her game counterpart. Lara Croft isn't just a female version of Indiana Jones or Nathan Drake. She doesn't go looking for treasure because she cares about preserving history or for any kind of monetary value. She does it because it's fun, plain and simple. She's an adrenaline junkie, and she's quite possibly crazy. Angelina Jolie is really freaking good in this role. While her accent work might leave something to be desired for some, her natural charisma and star power makes her a perfect fit for this character. She absolutely nails the cocky one-liners and the casual attitude towards danger. She just oozes confidence, and you know she is always in control of whatever situation she is in. But then, when you see her humanity peeking through, specifically in scenes regarding her father, Jolie does a good job in providing an emotional through line amongst the madness. This might be a controversial statement, but I honestly wouldn't have complained if this performance had been recognized by the Oscars or at least the Golden Globes. Not since Raul Julia played M. Bison have I seen an actor bring a video game character to life this effectively. Angelina Jolie simply is Lara Croft. But now let's talk about the supporting cast, and, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there are any characters that really overlap outside of Lara's butler, whose name and appearance have changed. So the film missed out on including any of the side characters and villains from the games, like Jacqueline Natla or Werner von Croy. However, most people with a passing knowledge of the Tomb Raider franchise probably aren't very familiar with the supporting cast, and so getting rid of them isn't the cardinal sin it might have been in a different adaptation. The primary villain of the film is Manfred Powell, played by Ian Glenn. I really like his performance, in particular the chemistry that he has with Lara. Both of them have this vague respect for the other, and he's the only one who seems able to push Lara's buttons the way she pushed everyone else's. It's a good rivalry. There's also Alex West, Lara's kinda sorta love interest, played by then relatively unknown actor Daniel Craig. And yes, he does an American accent in this film, and most of his scenes are with Angelina Jolie, who's doing a British accent. This gives all their scenes an extra layer of comedy that wasn't even intended. He plays his part fine, I guess. Lara has two other allies, Bryce, the tech guy, who's honestly pretty serviceable as far as comic relief characters go, and Hillary, the butler. Yes, Hillary is the name of a male character, and he's actually from the game to an extent. I'm not sure why they felt the need to change his name, but I like how he seems so blasé about all the crazy things that Lara does. On occasion, he tries to be the voice of reason, but Lara rarely, if ever, listens to him. I kind of wish somebody had taken Lara aside and said, hey, I know that Hillary might be a little old and unhip, but they have a lot of experience, and maybe if you hadn't been so willfully ignorant of everything Hillary warned you about, maybe you wouldn't have gotten yourself into such a dangerous situation. Wink, wink. Oh, and a side note, part of me wonders if Bryce was supposed to be based on Zip, who served a similar role in the Tomb Raider sequels. If so, would it have killed them to cast a person of color in this role? I will say, we do get a brief appearance by Lara's father, Lord Richard Croft, played by Angelina Jolie's real-life father, John Voight. I must admit, at first I thought that Voight wasn't putting a lot of energy into this performance and thought he had a surprising lack of chemistry with his daughter, but then I found out that he and his daughter were actually estranged during this point in their lives, and the two actors were actually shot separately and composited together in post-production. That's insane! But apparently, the film ended up being a factor in them repairing their relationship, so good on them. Now, for comparison's sake, in the reboot games, Lara is more of a team player, and there's room for the supporting characters to be interesting. But this really isn't the case in the original games. Every side character or villain is pretty two-dimensional. Nobody ever comes close to taking the spotlight away from Lara. and the movie stays true to this in essence. Initially, I was going to give this round a lower score for not fleshing out the side characters a little more, and not using characters from the game, but the depiction of Lara Croft is so spot on, and even the side characters all feel like they could have existed within the game's universe. At the end of the day, this is Lara's world. Everyone else is just living in it. I'm giving it an 8. Round 2, Setting. Seeing how the story of the film is not a retelling of any one particular game, a side effect of this is that the environments in the film don't take after one particular game. Let's start with Croft Manor itself, which is an incredible feat of production design. Not only does it look good in its own right, but it looks really close to the game's version of the manor, even down to the layout. It's also just a fun environment to be in, which is great because you're there for most of the first act of the movie before the globe-trotting properly begins, but you never get bored. Side note, in the game Tomb Raider Legend, which is an official Tomb Raider game and came out after this movie, they made Croft Manor an exact duplicate of the manor found in the film. I know it's not really relevant to the comparison I'm making, but I think it's pretty cool. In regards to the production values of the film, well, I'll start with the biggest downside. The CGI in this film has aged rather poorly, which can take you out of the experience, especially when faced with monsters that are supposed to be a threat. I mean, what is this, a video game? Wait. But if there is a benefit to the dated CGI, it's that it makes it rather obvious in hindsight when something is CGI and when it's real. And all of the sets in this movie are real, and they're real impressive. Some of them look a bit corny, like something out of an amusement park, but it perfectly matches the tone of the film, so it works. There are certain moments in the film that really feel like something out of the game. The opening scene comes to mind. Yes, it's just a training exercise that has no bearing on the plot, but the environment really nails the game's look. And in the sequence when Lara first arrives in Cambodia and is exploring the tombs, that's the rare moment in a video game adaptation that makes me tempted to pick up a controller, because it genuinely feels like I'm back in the game. The true highlights are the large set pieces, the giant swinging pendulum in Cambodia, and later the giant model of the solar system in Siberia. Not only is it impressive that they were actually built on a soundstage, but the way Lara tackles these challenges head-on is reminiscent of the games, but not so much that you find yourself wishing you had a controller for the most part. Even the story taking place in multiple exotic locations is something right out of the franchise. I don't know if Cambodia or Siberia were ever directly used in any of the main games, but they fit the atmosphere very well. Everything from the costume design to the color palette, it all matches up pretty nicely. So while it might have been nice to have better effects, I can't deny that the film is visually appealing throughout, and the locations all feel like they could have come right out of the game's world, which is what more films based on video games should strive to do. I'm giving it a 9. Round 3. Story. One thing that a lot of people might not know is that much of Lara's backstory that is used in later games came from this film. The idea of her father being dead and much of her motivation stemming from him is a film original. In the game, both of her parents are alive and well. But if that's the case, you might ask, then what drove her to become a Tomb Raider? Well, according to the game's instruction manual, Lara was born into wealth and raised to be an aristocrat until an incident where a plane she was on crashed in the Himalayas and she had to learn entirely new skills to survive. The experience had a profound effect on her, and when she returned home, she realized that she craved more from life than to be a socialite. So she set her sights on new goals, resulting in her parents disowning her. Now, I'm going to stop right there and say, that origin story would make an incredible movie. Like, there's such a good opportunity here to have a dynamic character arc and actual human drama, while still putting in some action set pieces and great visuals. I guess the idea is that they want Lara in this movie to be a firmly established character from the beginning, seeing how gamers already know her so well, and I get it, but with all the reboots that have been done to the franchise over the years, it's a real shame that we never got to see the original origin story told properly. Anyway, as said before, the plot of this film is not a direct adaptation of any of the games. While it might have been interesting to see that, I understand that gamers might be bored of seeing the same story again, only with the interactivity taken out. I mean, let's be honest, how many people were playing the original Tomb Raider games for the story? So, the story of the film is meant to feel like it could exist within the game's universe, with Lara's character and career established from the beginning. It doesn't bog you down with exposition, but luckily it's done in a way that anyone who hasn't played the games will catch on to the general premise quickly enough and not be confused. No, the confusion comes later. The first act of the film does offer up genuine intrigue with the Illuminati and the planetary alignment stuff, but as the film goes on, the writers put in less and less effort into making it make sense. There's a bunch of lingering red herrings that go unexplained and a bunch of questions that never get answered, to the point where by the time we get to the climax, I'm unable to truly get invested because I genuinely don't know what's going on anymore. I just knew that I was rooting for Lara to win, and luckily Jolie's committed performance was the one thing that kept me grounded. I did like the relationship between Lara and Powell, had they had a professional respect for one another despite being on opposite sides, and I also liked the chemistry Lara had with Bryce and Hillary. However, I did find it difficult to get invested in Lara's semi-romance with Alex West. And frankly, I don't buy that she would be willing to change the past to bring him back to life after deciding not to do the same with her father. And speaking of her father, while I think the connection that he has with Lara is interesting, I find myself wishing he wasn't an adventurer like her. I much prefer the self-made origin that the game version of Lara has. In the film, Lara is the person she is because of her father, and while there's nothing technically wrong with this, I really don't like the cliche of strong, badass woman who only got where she is because of her father. It's been used too many times. But on the flip side, I do give props for the writers for including the sequence where the bad guys break into Lara's home and she has to defend it. That scene comes right out of Tomb Raider 2, and it's a fun and clever way to have an intense action scene before we get to the bulk of the story. My big complaint with the story is that it doesn't make any sense, and too much stuff is never explained. But I guess the counterpoint to that is that in the game, I was fighting dinosaurs in level 3, and as far as I'm aware, the game never explained that. Even though the story is not a direct adaptation of one of the games, it feels almost like it could have been the plot of a lost Tomb Raider game. I just wish the story made enough sense for me to follow it. I think ultimately I'm going to split the difference and give it a 5. Round 4, Experience. So when I first started work on this video over a year ago, I played a little bit of the game on an emulator that didn't go past the first 2 levels. So I went into my first viewing of the movie with fairly limited knowledge of the game. But since then, I found an emulator that let me play the entirety of Tomb Raider 1, and I did just that. I also watched a series of YouTube videos by Steve of War that took me through the history of the franchise. Honestly, these videos are great. If you're a Tomb Raider fan or looking to become one, I highly recommend them. Link in the description. If you want to get technical, my big introduction to the Tomb Raider franchise was the 2013 reboot game, which wasn't a bad game by any means, but it didn't feel special. I didn't really see what the big deal was about the franchise. But having played the 1996 game, wow, I see it now. This game hooked me in despite the outdated graphics with a fun environment to play in, compelling worlds to explore, and tough but fair puzzles that don't just give you the answer but expect you to figure it out for yourself. It doesn't hold your hand like most games today, and when I beat it, I felt a real sense of accomplishment. Comparing the movie to the game, well, it goes without saying that the movie is more dialogue-focused and less action-focused. But much of the dialogue scenes do feel like something that would fit within the game's cutscenes, while the action scenes, sprinkled in carefully, feel surprisingly accurate to the game. The opening scene gets the movie off on the right foot, with Lara effortlessly exploring an environment that feels right out of the game, and then the robot shows up, which feels a little bit out there, but the efforts that Lara uses to subdue the robot do feel right out of the game. As I said earlier, the home invasion scene is taken from the game, the second one, though it's a bit more extreme with the wire work. Once we go to Cambodia, the production design captures the feel of the game to a T, and the same can be said for Siberia. I do like the Easter eggs that were snuck into the film. It's not just the obvious stuff like the dual-wielding pistols, but the more subtle references, like Hillary covering his face with a tray, or Lara's aha near the end when she finds the sled dogs. Which is not to say that the experience of this movie is perfect. The best way I can describe this movie is that it has all of the style of Mad Max Fury Road, but none of the substance. It struggles with tone and consistency. The movie wants to feel extreme, which dates it significantly. The editing choices are flashy and stylized, which often results in the film's story being not only hard to follow, but difficult to take seriously. Sometimes the editor knows to hold on a moment, but other times they just want to get past it as soon as possible. The epilogue, in particular, is maybe one of the most rushed sequences I've ever seen in any movie, taking only 1 minute and 9 seconds to speedrun through Lara's final interactions back home before the credits roll. But I think the biggest problem with the movie is the climax, which is solely focused on being cool rather than making any kind of sense. I mean, you've got dogs that turn into skeletons because of a rift in time, and then Lara and Powell are transported to a giant pyramid they have to run up the side of to grab the triangle, and then all of a sudden she's back with her dad. But then Powell gets stabbed and he ends up fighting better than ever somehow. And what was the significance of the two little girls again? I'm sorry for rushing through all that, but that's what the movie does. It is a bonkers ending. It throws all logic out the window and doesn't try to explain anything, whereas the ending of the game... Wait, what point was I trying to make again? And herein lies the truth at the heart of this adaptation. I don't think I could call this film a good movie, but paradoxically, I think it is a genuinely good adaptation. It does do a good job recreating the look and feel of the Tomb Raider games, just without the interactive elements. Another writer could have polished the story and make it make more sense, but this film's biggest problem might be that it adapted the games too well. So, how the heck do I rank it? I think this movie had the potential to be better than it was. It could have been a genuinely great action movie that could still be enjoyed today, and maybe that film would have truly ended the video game movie curse right then and there. As it stands, Lara Croft Tomb Raider is an enjoyable bit of nonsense that fails as a movie, but somehow succeeds as an adaptation. I think Jolie's performance and the production design make it worth watching for any Tomb Raider fan, but the story and editing choices make it less accessible for anyone who's not a fan. But if the job of the filmmakers was to bring the game to life on the big screen, well, I feel like they succeeded. Yeah, so this is complicated. Part of the reason I spent so long on this video was because for the longest time, I wasn't sure if I should be judging the film by how it holds up as a film or how it holds up as an adaptation. I think, ultimately, I'm going to go with the latter. And in the category of experience, it gets a score of 9. Which brings us to our final total. Lara Croft Tomb Raider gets a score of 31 out of 40, 77% for a final score of C+. I debated this score for a long time. I thought about giving the film a B-, but when I really thought about it, each of my individual grades felt right. So this movie is currently tied with Wing Commander for best film of a video game. I'm honestly not sure which film I prefer, as they both have an equal amount of pros and cons. At any rate, if this is a pass-fail situation, Lara Croft Tomb Raider earns a passing grade. And that's it. I can't believe it, but after all this time, I finally finished the video on Lara Croft Tomb Raider, and all I have to say is...
I feel stronger now.
The next film on my list is Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. And yes, I've heard people say that this film has so little to do with the game series it's named after that it shouldn't even count, but the film is included on most lists of video game adaptations, and it was noteworthy for its revolutionary animation, so I do want to talk about it. Let's hope this one doesn't take another year. See you then.